For just 24 hours, it looked like a major breakthrough was finally coming, a moment that could cool tensions in the world's most critical energy choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the possibility of peace just vanished. So, what just happened?
This is the big question, right? The one that left media outlets, financial markets, and governments totally scrambling. Was this just a broken promise, a sign of complete chaos in Tehran, or was it something else entirely? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what went down and show you why the most common interpretation is almost certainly wrong.
Okay, to really get this, we have to look at the clock, because the timing, it's everything. On April 16th, we get some great news, a ceasefire in Lebanon. In response, Iran makes what looks like this huge goodwill gesture: we'll open the Strait of Hormuz. The very next day, April 17th, oil tankers start moving, prices dip, markets are thrilled. It feels like we're heading in the right direction. But then, just 24 hours later, the US announces its blockade on Iranian ports is staying put. And Iran's response? It was immediate. The strait is shut down again, just like that.
So how do we make sense of this whiplash? Here's our game plan. First, we'll unpack the puzzle and see how most of the world misread the signal. Then, we're going to show you how to reframe this whole thing, not as a failure, but as a deliberate 24-hour demonstration. We'll dive into the theory behind it all, what's called the language of power, and see how this move completely changed the negotiation. And finally, we'll leave you with the key signals you need to watch for next.
The immediate reaction from pretty much everyone was, confusion, which was very quickly followed by condemnation. The dominant story that formed was that Iran's actions were erratic, unreliable, and basically a betrayal of a fragile new understanding.
The headlines basically wrote themselves, right? Iran breaks its promise. Tehran proves it's an unreliable partner. But here's the thing. This interpretation doesn't just miss a few key details, it misses the entire point. What we all just watched was not a broken promise. It was a demonstration, a very precisely calculated strategic message.
Okay, so if it wasn't a failure, what in the world was it? Well, it was a masterclass in strategic signaling. In that tiny 24-hour window, Iran proved 3 absolutely critical points to the United States and to the rest of the world. 3 things that no diplomatic statement, no UN speech, no satellite image could ever prove so clearly.
So the first crucial point Iran managed to prove was this.
They proved they have total, practical, on-the-ground control over that strait. I'm not talking about partial control or theoretical control, I mean total. When Iran flipped the switch to on, the oil tankers moved. The second they flipped it to off, they stopped. All the US aircraft carriers and destroyers in the region, in that moment, they were completely irrelevant. This was a brilliant way to show the difference between simply claiming you have control and actually demonstrating it for the whole world to see.
Now the second thing Iran proved, this is where it gets really fascinating.
They turned a vague threat into a specific conditional formula. I mean, look at this equation here. They created a direct link. They opened the strait when the Lebanon ceasefire was announced, and they slammed it shut the very moment the US confirmed its sanctions, its port blockade would continue. They created a crystal clear formula for everyone to see. Peace in Lebanon plus sanctions relief for us equals an open waterway for you. This isn't just talk anymore. It's a demonstrated cause and effect relationship.
And the third and final point of this whole demonstration really gets to the heart of the power dynamic.
Iran proved that its leverage and US leverage are on 2 completely different levels. You can almost see it like a scale. The US can blockade Iranian ports, and yeah, that hurts Iran's economy. But Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz, which hurts the entire global economy. By doing this, they showed that their strategic asset is far more valuable, and it creates this immense political pressure on the US from its own allies, a kind of pressure that a military presence just can't solve.
So this brings us to our next section, which is all about what we're calling the language of power. This whole event really forces us to rethink what strength actually means in geopolitics. Most of us have a very simple view of power. It's about who has the bigger army, the bigger budget, but there's another, much more subtle form of power that was on full display here.
On one side, you have brute force, the traditional stuff, who has more ships, more planes. But on the other, you have what we call conditional power. And this isn't about physical might. It's about the ability to define the conditions, the rules under which the entire system functions. Iran might not have military parity with the US, but it just proved that it has the conditional power to literally write the formula for a return to normal. And this brings us to a really key concept from game theory, the costly signal. A costly signal is an action that becomes believable because it actually comes at a cost to the person performing it. Think about it. Opening the strait, even for just one day, was not free for Iran. It cost them leverage, and it cost them political capital with their own internal hardliners. But that's exactly why the signal was so powerful and so credible. It proved they were deadly serious about their terms. This is captured perfectly by this idea. This isn't the behavior of a state you can't trust. It's the behavior of a state communicating through observable action. The issue wasn't about trust, it was about clear communication. When a country says, "We will do X if you do Y," and then they follow through perfectly, well, that's not inconsistency, that's ruthless consistency. It's a form of communication that is impossible to ignore.
And we've actually seen this kind of play before. Way back during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev sent President Kennedy two very different messages, back to back. One was soft, the other was hard. For years, this just confused historians. But when you look at it as a costly signal, it makes perfect sense. Khrushchev was demonstrating that he had multiple options and that he would help define the terms for ending the crisis. Iran's 24-hour cycle was structurally the exact same move.
So, what was the real-world impact of all this theory? Well, this 24-hour maneuver fundamentally changed the entire dynamic of the negotiations. It wasn't just sending a signal, it was a direct intervention that actually shifted the balance of power right before that big April 21st deadline.
Let's just look at the numbers. Before this whole event, analysts put the odds of a deal by April 21st at about 50-50. As you can see in the table here, after Iran's demonstration, that probability ticked up to 55%. Now, 5% jump might not sound like a lot, but in high-stakes geopolitics, that's a significant shift. And why? Because the price of not making a deal suddenly became painfully, undeniably clear to everyone involved. And that's a crucial point. The best deals aren't born from trust. They're born from a very clear, shared understanding of the cost of failure.
This maneuver also completely changes the internal math for both sides. So for the US, the pragmatists in Washington now have concrete proof they can point to and say, see, military pressure alone isn't going to work. For Iran, the pragmatists in Tehran can now argue that they're negotiating from a position of proven strength, not weakness. And critically, it gives the lead US negotiator, J.D. Vance, a lot of political cover. He can now frame any compromise not as a concession, but as a smart, necessary move to stabilize the global economy.
So, as we get closer to this deadline, what should we all be looking for? This 24-hour gambit has created some very specific, observable indicators that will tell us which way this is all heading. So here are 4 signals of a potential breakthrough that you can watch for yourself.
All right, here's what to look for. First, pay very close attention to the lead U.S. negotiator, J.D. Vance. If his public statements even subtly acknowledge Iran's demonstration, that's a huge sign the message was received. Second, listen to the tone of the Iranian hardliners, someone like Ghalibaf. If you suddenly hear words like progress or constructive, it means the pragmatists are winning that internal debate in Tehran. Third, watch for any change in language from U.S. Central Command. If they soften their rhetoric on enforcing the blockade, it's a big signal they're preparing for a diplomatic off-ramp. And finally, just keep an eye on the markets. If they start pricing in stability, it means the world's biggest investors believe a repeatable formula for de-escalation has finally been found. So when you boil it all down, the key takeaway is this. What happened in the Strait of Hormuz wasn't a diplomatic blunder or a sign of chaos. It was one of the purest examples of coercive diplomacy we have seen in modern history. Iran didn't just open and close a waterway. It wrote the conditions of the negotiation in a language that is impossible to misinterpret, impossible to deny, and impossible to walk back. And this really leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question. As we watch this and other conflicts unfold around the world, maybe we need to redefine our whole understanding of what power is. Maybe true strength isn't just about who has the most firepower, but about being the one who can demonstrate to the entire world that without your conditions being met, the system simply cannot return to normal.